The metal of the handcuffs bit into my wrists as Sheriff Sheila Dawson stared down at me with that cold, practiced smile. My daughter sobbed in the background, her small hands clutching the doorframe of our home. The neighbors had gathered outside, watching in stunned silence as the sheriff's deputies ransacked my newly purchased ranch house. "Well, well," Sheriff Sheila drawled, her badge glinting in the afternoon sun. "Looks like we found ourselves a problem citizen. 40 grams of methamphetamine hidden in your barn. That is a serious offense." My blood ran cold. I had never seen drugs in my life. My years in federal service had taught me what planted evidence looked like. The small bag she dangled before me had never been in my possession. "You picked the wrong town to make trouble in," she whispered, her breath hot against my ear as she pushed me toward the patrol car. That was the moment I realized the depth of her corruption. What Sheriff Sheila did not know was that I had recorded everything, and that I had not come home to retire. I had come to clean house. The irony was that 15 years ago, I had left Pinewood Valley seeking excitement and purpose. Now I returned for precisely the opposite reason. The city had worn me down. 15 years of investigation work with the Federal Oversight Commission had left me cynical, exhausted, and in desperate need of the simplicity that only my hometown could offer. My Uncle Lester had passed 6 months prior, leaving his struggling ranch to me, the only living relative who might actually want it. The property sat on 80 acres of once fertile land, now overgrown and neglected after his long illness. The fence lines sagged. The barn needed a new roof. The house smelled of dust and abandonment. But when I stood on the front porch that first evening, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and purple, I knew I had made the right decision. This was where I would heal. This was where I would forget the darkness I had seen in my career. This was home. "Planning to stay long?" Mrs. Winters asked when I stopped by her general store for supplies. Her eyes sparkled with genuine warmth, one of the few people who remembered me from before. "For good, I hope," I replied, loading bags of nails and wire cutters into my cart. "The ranch needs work, but that is exactly what I need too." She nodded knowingly. "Your uncle would be pleased, though you might want to make sure your permits are in order before you start any major renovations." Permits for my own land. The question left my mouth before I could consider it. Mrs. Winters lowered her voice. "Things have changed around here, Thomas. Sheriff's office oversees most of the county administration now. Sheriff Sheila runs a tight ship." I first encountered Sheriff Sheila Dawson 3 days later at the monthly town meeting. She stood at the front of the hall in her crisp uniform, spine straight as a ruler, auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun. Something about her demeanor immediately put me on edge, a sensation I had learned to trust during my years investigating corrupt officials. "And we have a returning resident," Mayor Hopkins announced with forced enthusiasm. "Thomas Mitchell, back to restore the old Mitchell Ranch." All eyes turned to me. I nodded politely, but when my gaze met Sheriff Sheila's, something cold passed between us. Her assessment was methodical, professional, and deeply suspicious. After the meeting, she approached me directly. Her handshake was firm to the point of aggression. "Welcome back to Pinewood, Mr. Mitchell. Been away a long time," she said, her tone suggesting this was more accusation than observation. "15 years. Worked in the city. Government administration," I replied, keeping it vague. My instincts told me to reveal as little as possible. "Government, huh?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Well, things run differently here. Small town, close-knit, we take care of our own problems." "I am just here to fix up my uncle's place," I assured her. "No trouble." "See that it stays that way," she replied with a tight smile that never reached her eyes. "We will be watching." 2 days later, a white county vehicle pulled into my driveway. A young man in uniform approached with a clipboard, eyeing my newly repaired fence line. "Morning, sir. Code inspection," he announced, his voice carrying an authority that seemed practiced rather than earned. "Sheriff's office received reports of possible violations." "Violations? I just started repairs yesterday," I said, setting down my hammer. He shrugged, uncomfortable. "Just following orders, sir. Need to measure your fence height, check your property line markers, and inspect any animal enclosures." I stood silently as he photographed my property, made notes, and placed a yellow tag on my mailbox. The tag read "Notice of Inspection" in bold letters, visible to anyone driving past. As he prepared to leave, I asked, "Is this standard procedure for new residents?" He hesitated, glancing back at his vehicle. "Not exactly, sir." Then, lowering his voice, "Sheriff Dawson specifically requested your property be inspected, priority basis." After he left, I walked the perimeter of my land, thinking. I had come here seeking peace, looking to leave behind the world of power struggles and corruption. But as I surveyed the yellow tag flapping in the breeze, a public declaration that I was being watched, I felt the familiar tension return to my shoulders. I had not come looking for trouble, but Sheriff Sheila Dawson seemed determined to find it anyway. What she did not yet realize was that trouble was my specialty, and I had spent 15 years learning how to handle people exactly like her. The first indication that Sheriff Sheila was more than just overzealous came from Old Joe at the hardware store. I had gone in for roofing supplies when he mentioned the church fundraiser cancellation. "Barbecue had been running for 30 years, he muttered, cutting lengths of timber for me. "Then last summer, sheriff shows up with 3 deputies, shuts the whole thing down, said their smoke was a public nuisance, and they lacked proper food service permits." "Could they not apply for permits?" I asked, helping him load the wood. Old Joe gave a humorless laugh. "Pastor tried. 3 times. Applications kept getting lost in processing. See, Pastor Williams had questioned the sheriff about impounding vehicles from the church parking lot during services." I frowned. "That seems excessive." "That is just how she operates," Old Joe said, his voice dropping to a whisper despite the empty store. "Anybody questions her, they find themselves with problems. Building code violations, traffic stops, health inspections. Sheriff Sheila does not forgive, and she never forgets." Over the next week, I heard similar stories everywhere I went. The diner owner who had to pay thousands in emergency plumbing inspections after hosting a meeting for a woman who wanted to run against Sheriff Sheila for county commission. The high school principal who was cited for improper waste disposal after questioning increased police presence in school hallways. "She started as a deputy 8 years ago," Linda at the post office explained as she processed my change of address form. "Worked her way up quick. When old Sheriff Miller retired, she ran unopposed. Nobody dared challenge her." "Nobody?" I asked, surprised. Linda's eyes darted to make sure we were alone. "There was one. Martin Fletcher owned the local newspaper, started asking questions about county funds, published some articles about resource allocation. Next thing, his delivery drivers are getting pulled over daily. His advertisers received visits from deputies suggesting they reconsider their business associations. Within 3 months, the paper folded, and Martin moved away." That evening, I stopped at the corner gas station. As I filled my truck, a patrol car pulled in sharply, lights flashing. Sheriff Sheila emerged, approaching a young woman struggling with a toddler and an infant at the adjacent pump. "License and registration," Sheila demanded without preamble. The woman fumbled with her purse while trying to keep the crying toddler from wandering. "Is something wrong, Sheriff?" "Your tags expired yesterday," Sheriff Sheila stated coldly. "You are operating an unregistered vehicle." "Yesterday?" The woman looked stricken. "I am so sorry. I have been overwhelmed with the kids and—" "Excuses do not change laws, Mrs. Porter," Sheriff Sheila interrupted. "Perhaps if you spent less time at those community meetings and more time ensuring you follow county regulations, you would not be in this situation." I watched as the sheriff wrote a ticket, her movements deliberate and slow, while the young mother's children continued crying. Other customers averted their eyes, pretending not to notice. "Please," Mrs. Porter whispered. "We are already behind on bills since the daycare shut down." Sheriff Sheila looked up sharply. The daycare was operating without proper licensing. Another example of how this community needs proper enforcement. She tore off the ticket and held it out. $250, due within 30 days or your license will be suspended. As Sheriff Sheila returned to her vehicle, her eyes met mine briefly. There was no shame there, no hesitation, only cold authority and something darker that I recognized from my years investigating corruption, the intoxication of unchecked power. The following day, I visited the local library, hoping to learn more about the town's recent history. The elderly librarian, Mrs. Hendricks, had been my English teacher years ago. "Thomas Mitchell," she smiled, genuine warmth in her eyes. "I heard you were back, still have that analytical mind." "Some habits never break," I admitted. "I am trying to understand how things work around here now." Her smile faded slightly. "Carefully, that is how things work now, very carefully." She led me to a back table away from the few other patrons and spoke softly. "When I retired from teaching 5 years ago, this was still a community. Now it is more like a fiefdom." "Because of Sheriff Sheila?" I asked directly. Mrs. Hendricks visibly tensed. "You always were perceptive." "What happened?" "Power happened," she sighed. "Our county commissioner fell ill. Budget cuts eliminated several administrative positions. Sheriff's Department absorbed those functions temporarily. That was 4 years ago. Now she controls code enforcement, permits, inspections, even most of the town administrative functions." I leaned closer, and nobody speaks up. Mrs. Hendricks looked at me with tired eyes. "Everyone who has tried has paid a price, Thomas. Some lost businesses, others their reputations. A few simply left town." She patted my hand gently. "Whatever you are thinking of doing, do not. This is not the same town you left." As I walked to my truck, I noticed a patrol car slowly cruising past the library. The deputy inside watched me get into my vehicle, then made a call on his radio. That night, sitting on my porch watching distant lightning illuminate the mountains, I realized Sheriff Sheila had built something both impressive and terrifying. A perfect system of control through fear, procedural harassment, and isolation of anyone who challenged her authority. I had spent my career dismantling systems exactly like this one. I knew how they worked. I knew their weaknesses. What I did not know yet was whether I was ready to step back into that fight, or if I truly wanted the peace I had come here seeking. The first citation arrived 3 days later, a bright orange notice affixed to my front gate. "Violation, unsecured fencing section 121034 County Code." The fine was $500, with a requirement to remedy the violation within 72 hours or face additional penalties. I stood there in the morning light, reading and rereading the notice. The fence was brand new, installed exactly to code specifications. I had checked the regulations thoroughly before beginning work. My neighbor, Hank Prescott, drove past on his tractor, slowing when he saw me with the notice. "Got your first one, huh?" he called out, cutting his engine. "First what?" "First citation." He climbed down, approaching with the careful gait of a man who had worked the land his entire life. "Sheriff's office has been busy around here lately." I showed him the notice. "The fence is precisely to code." Hank adjusted his weathered hat. "Code does not matter much these days. What matters is whether you have ruffled any feathers." He gave me a knowing look. "Been asking questions around town, I hear." The second citation came 2 days later while I was installing irrigation pipes. This time, a deputy delivered it personally. A young officer named Carter who seemed uncomfortable with his assignment. "Illegal livestock enclosure," he stated, avoiding eye contact as he handed me the paperwork. "Section 153027. "I do not have any livestock yet," I pointed out reasonably. Deputy Carter shifted his weight. "The citation is for, preparation to house livestock without proper permits." I studied him closely. He could not have been more than 25, with a face still carrying traces of youth beneath his official demeanor. "Is this how you imagined law enforcement when you took the oath, Deputy Carter?" I asked quietly. Something flashed in his eyes, doubt, perhaps, or recognition of the absurdity of his position. He glanced toward his patrol car before speaking. "You are asking too many questions, sir," he said, his voice lowered significantly. "About the sheriff, about how things run around here." He took a step back. "That is not healthy in this county." "Is that a threat, deputy?" "No, sir, friendly advice." He started walking away, then paused. "The sheriff does not like newcomers stirring things up." "I have been here before," I reminded him. He shook his head. "Not her Pinewood Valley, this is her territory now." That night, I sat at my kitchen table documenting the citations, creating a detailed log with photographs and measurements proving compliance with all regulations. Old habits died hard. 15 years of building cases against corrupt officials had taught me the value of meticulous records. The sound came just after midnight, a sharp metallic crack followed by an electrical hum that abruptly died. I grabbed my flashlight and headed outside, moving cautiously toward the well pump. The damage was deliberate and professional. Someone had cut through the main power cable and damaged the control panel. Not enough to destroy it completely, just enough to disable it and send a message. I surveyed the dark fields surrounding my property. A quarter-mile away, headlights moved slowly along the county road. They paused briefly when my flashlight beam swept in that direction, then accelerated away. The next morning, I drove to Riverton, the neighboring county seat, and purchased security cameras. I installed them carefully, hiding most among trees and outbuildings where they would not be easily spotted. By nightfall, my property had invisible eyes watching every approach. When I entered the diner for breakfast the following day, conversations halted briefly before resuming at a lower volume. Sarah, the waitress who had been friendly on previous visits, served my coffee with minimal conversation, her eyes darting nervously toward the window. Outside, a patrol car sat parked across the street, the deputy inside watching the diner entrance. "Third time this week," commented an elderly man at the counter, following my gaze to the patrol car. "Never used to see them in town this much before you arrived." I sipped my coffee. "Is that right?" "Sheriff has taken quite an interest in you," he continued, introducing himself as Frank Miller, the former town doctor. "That usually does not end well for folks." "I am just fixing up my uncle's place," I replied evenly. Frank gave me a sad smile. Nobody gets this much attention for fixing fences, son. That afternoon, I found my mailbox smashed flat, apparently hit by a vehicle that had left black paint streaks on the damaged metal. 2 hours later, as I was installing a replacement, Sheriff Sheila herself drove slowly past my property, making no attempt to hide her surveillance. That evening, I received a call from an unlisted number. "Mitchell," I answered, sitting on my darkened porch. "It is Carter," came the hushed voice of the young deputy. "You need to know something. She is running background checks on you, deep ones, asking questions about your work history." My pulse quickened. "Why are you telling me this?" A long pause followed. "I joined to help people, not to harass them." Another pause. "Watch yourself. They are talking about searching your property, looking for something, anything." "On what grounds?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Does it matter? She will find grounds," he replied before hanging up. I sat in silence afterward, weighing my options. Sheriff Sheila was escalating rapidly, moving from intimidation to active targeting. If she dug deep enough into my background, she would eventually discover my real career history, and that would either make her back off or push her to more desperate measures. The decision I had been avoiding now demanded an answer. I could sell the ranch and leave. Many others had chosen that path. Or I could stay and fight, using the skills I had spent a career developing. I walked to my truck and retrieved a satellite phone from the locked compartment under the seat, a secure line untraceable by local authorities. I dialed a number I had promised myself I would not use again. "Mark Johnson," answered the familiar voice of my former supervisor at the Federal Oversight Commission. "It is Mitchell," I said, feeling the weight of my choice settling onto my shoulders. "I think I found another one." A moment of silence, then a short, knowing laugh. "I wondered how long your retirement would last. Tell me everything." As I began detailing Sheriff Sheila's operation, I watched another patrol car drive slowly past my property. The deputy inside made no attempt to be subtle, shining a spotlight across my land before continuing down the road. The target on my back had just gotten bigger, but now, for the first time since arriving home, I was ready to wear it. Most residents of Pinewood Valley saw a tired rancher when they looked at me, a hometown boy returned after years in the big city, perhaps unsuccessful, perhaps homesick. An easy target for Sheriff Sheila's systematic intimidation. What they could not see was the man I had become during those 15 years away, the training that had shaped me, the cases that had hardened me, the corruption I had dismantled across dozens of jurisdictions. I pulled a metal lockbox from beneath my bed and opened it with a key I kept separate from all others. Inside lay my credentials: Federal Oversight Commission, Special Investigator, Level 3 clearance, my true identity for the past decade and a half. The Federal Oversight Commission operated in shadows by design, investigating corruption within local and state agencies when traditional channels failed. We moved quietly, built cases meticulously, and struck decisively when evidence was secure. Sheriff Sheila Dawson was hardly the first corrupt official I had encountered, merely the first I had found in my own hometown. I laid out my equipment on the kitchen table, high-resolution recording devices disguised as everyday objects, document scanners the size of credit cards, and specialized software for cataloging evidence. Tools of a trade I had supposedly left behind. "You were supposed to be retired," I muttered to myself, assembling a pen camera with practiced ease. The irony was not lost on me. I had come home seeking peace after my last case had nearly killed me. That investigation, a corrupt judicial circuit in northern Michigan, had resulted in multiple convictions, but also in 3 days I spent in intensive care after my cover was blown. A judge's brother had expressed his displeasure with my work using a baseball bat in a parking garage. My supervisor had suggested retirement might be the wisest option. I had agreed at the time. Now I was not so certain. My satellite phone rang, breaking my concentration. "Mitchell," I answered. "Got your preliminary report," Mark said without preamble. "This Sheriff Dawson has built quite the operation. Classic small-town corruption architecture." "Complete vertical integration," I confirmed. "Code enforcement, permit approval, law enforcement, and administrative penalties all under her control. The state should be providing oversight." I laughed without humor. State inspector visits annually, stays at the lake resort sheriff owns through a shell company, always gives glowing reports. Mark was silent for a moment. "You know I cannot authorize a formal investigation without more substantial evidence. Budget cuts have hit us hard." "I am not asking for authorization," I replied, looking out my window at the stars. "Just information and support." "Off the books," Mark sounded concerned. "Thomas, you nearly died last time. Doctor said another blow to your head could." "Just initial support," I interrupted. "Database access, information channels. I need to know who she has paid off and who might still be clean." Mark sighed heavily. "This is personal for you." "It is my home," I said simply. "I will help unofficially," he finally relented. "But promise me you will be careful, build the case slowly, document everything, do not confront her directly." After hanging up, I walked my property in the darkness, mentally cataloging the areas visible from the road and planning my investigation. Sheriff Sheila had made a critical error in targeting me so quickly. She had revealed her method of operation before learning who I really was. The next morning, I drove to the county record's office. The clerk, a middle-aged woman named Helen, watched nervously as I requested public documents regarding sheriff department funding, seizure records, and code enforcement finances. "These records require special clearance," she stammered, clearly uncomfortable. I smiled reassuringly. "They are public documents according to state transparency laws. Section 47(b) specifically prohibits requiring special clearance for budget allocations." Her eyes widened slightly at my detailed knowledge of the law. "I would need to check with the sheriff's office first." "That puts you in a difficult position legally," I noted gently. "Refusal to provide public documents is a violation of state code that could result in personal liability. I would hate to see you penalized for following incorrect orders." Color drained from her face. I was using Sheriff Sheila's tactics, fear and intimidation, but aimed at compelling lawful behavior rather than preventing it. Still, the irony was not lost on me. "Give me an hour," Helen whispered. I returned 90 minutes later to find a thumb drive waiting in an envelope. Helen avoided my eyes as I thanked her. Back at my ranch, I began analyzing the documents. The patterns emerged quickly. Property seizures had increased 400% under Sheriff Sheila's administration. Fine revenue had tripled. Most concerning was the distribution of enforcement actions. They clustered around businesses and individuals who had opposed Sheriff Sheila politically or questioned her authority. I created digital maps overlaying enforcement actions with political support networks. The correlation was damning. My phone rang again that evening. "Found something interesting in the state database," Mark said. "Your Sheriff Dawson applied to the FBI Academy 3 times, rejected each time during the background check phase. Interesting, I mused. Failed law enforcement ambitions often drive this kind of behavior. There is more, Mark continued. Her father was investigated for corruption when he was sheriff of Conway County 15 years ago, committed suicide before the case concluded. The pieces clicked into place, so she is continuing the family business just more carefully. And with a personal grudge against oversight agencies, Mark added. Watch yourself, Thomas. This type just became more dangerous. That night, I set up a secure encrypted server in my barn, hidden behind hay bales and connected to solar panels independent from the main power grid. Every piece of evidence would be automatically uploaded, protected against any attempt to seize or destroy my physical records. As I worked, I heard a vehicle approach slowly on the road. Through the barn slats, I watched a patrol car pass, its spotlight sweeping across my property. Deputy Carter was behind the wheel, looking tense even from a distance. I stood motionless until the car disappeared around the bend. Then I continued my work, a sense of cold determination settling over me. Sheriff Sheila was hunting a simple rancher, a potential troublemaker to be intimidated back into line. What she had found instead was someone who had spent 15 years learning to dismantle operations exactly like hers, and I was just getting started. The raid came at dawn, that transitional hour when most residents were still asleep, but just enough light filtered through the clouds to make their operation legal. 3 patrol cars and Sheriff Sheila's personal vehicle rolled onto my property, lights flashing but sirens silent. I had been awake for hours already, alerted by motion sensors I had installed along my driveway. I stood on my porch, a mug of coffee in hand, watching their choreographed approach with the detached interest of a man who had seen such performances many times before. Sheriff Sheila emerged from her vehicle first, adjusting her hat with deliberate slowness. 4 deputies fanned out behind her, hands resting on their sidearms. The message was clear: intimidation through overwhelming force. "Sheriff," I greeted calmly as she approached, "what brings you out at this hour?" "Thomas Mitchell," she said, my name sounding like an accusation in her mouth. "We have received multiple reports of code violations on this property, potential environmental hazards." "Reports from whom?" Her smile was cold. "Concerned citizens." "I would like to see the complaint forms," I replied evenly. A flash of irritation crossed her face. "This is not a negotiation, Mr. Mitchell. We have authority to inspect for violations under County Ordinance 47C. I took a slow sip of coffee. That ordinance requires written notice 48 hours before non-emergency inspections. Sheriff Sheila's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Are you refusing a lawful order?" "Not at all," I replied, stepping aside. "I merely wanted to establish that this inspection lacks proper legal foundation. Please proceed." My casual acknowledgement of the violation seemed to unsettle her more than resistance would have. I had denied her the confrontation she clearly wanted. "Search the outbuildings," she ordered her deputies. "Check all enclosures and water systems. Document everything." What followed was a calculated performance designed to assert dominance. Deputies searched my barn with exaggerated thoroughness, emptying storage containers and questioning the 2 ranch hands I had hired to help with repairs. They confiscated tools for verification of proper permitting and took soil samples from multiple locations. Most provocatively, they took my dog, a 3-year-old German Shepherd named Rex, for a welfare inspection at the county animal control facility. Throughout it all, I maintained a calm exterior while my hidden cameras recorded every action, every violation of procedure, every overreach of authority. Sheriff Sheila watched me closely, clearly frustrated by my lack of visible reaction. When they finally prepared to leave 2 hours later, Sheriff Sheila approached me directly. "Your cooperation is noted," she said with artificial pleasantness, "though we found several areas of concern that will require follow-up." "I am certain you did," I replied evenly. She moved closer, dropping her voice. "People around here respect authority, Mr. Mitchell, those who do not tend to have difficulties." "Is that a threat, Sheriff?" "An observation," she replied, her smile never reaching her eyes. "This community runs smoothly when everyone understands their place in it." "And where is my place?" I asked. "That depends entirely on you," she said, turning to leave. "Some people fit in, others need to be shown the door." As the vehicles pulled away, Deputy Carter lingered behind momentarily. When the others were not looking, he slipped me a folded note before hurrying to catch up. Once alone, I unfolded the paper. "She is planning to plant evidence next time. Be careful." That afternoon, I retrieved Rex from animal control, finding him unharmed but agitated. The facility manager avoided my eyes when I asked about the basis for the seizure. "Just following orders," he muttered, sliding my dog's paperwork across the counter. That evening, I compiled all footage from the raid, organizing it chronologically and noting each procedural violation. When complete, I encrypted the files and sent them through a secure channel to my contact at the State Oversight Agency, anonymously, with no connection to my name or identity. I had barely finished when my phone rang, an unlisted local number. "Mitchell," I answered. "This has gone far enough," came Sheriff Sheila's voice, tightly controlled anger vibrating in each syllable. "Whatever game you think you are playing needs to stop now." "No game, Sheriff. Just trying to restore my family property." "You have been asking questions, requesting restricted documents, challenging my officers." Her tone hardened further. "That stops now, or the next inspection will find something much more serious than code violations." After she hung up, I sat in silence for several minutes, weighing my options. Sheriff Sheila was growing desperate, which made her more dangerous but also more likely to make mistakes. The following morning, I attended the town council meeting. Sheriff Sheila was presenting her monthly public safety report, standing tall in her pressed uniform before the small crowd of residents. "Crime remains at historic lows thanks to proactive enforcement," she announced proudly. "Our community is safer than ever." When the mayor called for public comments, I rose from my seat. Sheriff Sheila's eyes locked onto mine, her expression a warning. "I would like to inquire about the process for filing complaints regarding potential misuse of county resources," I stated clearly. "Specifically, how citizens can ensure accountability when law enforcement actions seem potentially motivated by personal rather than public interests." The room fell silent. Then came nervous whispers as residents glanced between me and Sheriff Sheila, whose face had hardened into a mask of professional composure, barely concealing fury. "The sheriff's office maintains an internal affairs division for such concerns," the mayor replied uncomfortably. "Headed by Sheriff Dawson's cousin, correct?" I asked innocently. Sheriff Sheila stepped forward. "Mr. Mitchell seems determined to undermine public confidence in local institutions," she stated, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "As sheriff, I must express concern about individuals who appear intent on disrupting the peace and order we have worked so hard to establish." She stared directly at me. Some elements in our community present growing threats to local peace. Rest assured, my office is monitoring these situations closely." The veiled threat hung in the air as the meeting adjourned. As residents filtered out, many avoided eye contact with me, though a few nodded subtly in apparent support. Outside the hall, I found my truck's tires had been slashed. A citation for improper parking had been placed under the windshield wiper. The message was clear. Sheriff Sheila had declared open war. What she did not understand was that I had spent my career preparing for exactly this kind of battle. And unlike her previous targets, I knew precisely how to fight back. The first response from the State Oversight Agency came 3 days after I submitted the raid footage. A secure, encrypted message appeared on my satellite phone, brief but encouraging. Evidence received. Initial review suggests multiple procedural violations. Continuing assessment. It was not much, but it was a start. More importantly, it meant official eyes were now watching Sheriff Sheila from outside her sphere of influence. I needed to build on that momentum by finding others willing to speak up. My opportunity came unexpectedly at the hardware store. I was selecting lumber for barn repairs when I overheard 2 men speaking in hushed tones about Sheriff Sheila's latest target. The local diner owner had received 3 health code violations after refusing to comp meals for deputies. One of the men, a stocky fellow with calloused hands and a weathered face, caught me listening. Rather than turning away, he held my gaze with unexpected boldness. "Mitchell Wright?" he asked, approaching me. "Harold Cooper. I maintain the grounds at the high school." "Good to meet you, Harold," I replied, shaking his hand. He glanced around before speaking again. "Heard about your troubles with the sheriff. Not the first newcomer she has targeted." He hesitated. "Some of us meet sometimes, just to talk, you know, maybe share some experiences." I understood immediately what he was offering. "I would appreciate that, Harold." 2 nights later, I followed Harold's carefully worded directions to an old fishing cabin by the lake. Inside, 5 people waited nervously. Harold, an elderly couple I recognized from church, a young woman who worked at the town library, and a middle-aged man who kept his cap pulled low. "This is everyone who was willing to come," Harold explained apologetically. "Others wanted to, but—" he trailed off. "Fear runs deep," I acknowledged. "I understand." The elderly woman, Martha Jensen, spoke first. "3 years ago, they fined us $5,000 for unauthorized landscaping after my husband questioned the new property tax assessments at a town meeting." "Bushes," her husband clarified bitterly. "Rhododendrons my wife has been growing for 20 years. Suddenly, they were non-native invasive species requiring removal." The librarian, Rebecca, shared how book donations had been seized during a routine inspection after she organized a civic awareness program. The man in the cap turned out to be Jim Edwards, the high school janitor. "I got pulled over for a broken taillight," Jim explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sheriff searched my car, said she found drug residue. There was nothing there, I swear it. But she told me if I did not want to lose my job at the school, I would need to report any suspicious conversations I overheard from teachers or students." I recorded each testimony with their permission, carefully establishing dates, locations, and details. These were not just complaints, they were evidence of systematic abuse of power. "What can you actually do?" Harold finally asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. "Sheriff Sheila has connections everywhere. County officials, judges, state inspectors, they all back her." "Not everyone," I replied, "and not for long." I did not reveal my background, but I let them see my confidence. "I need you to trust me and keep meeting. Bring others if you can safely. Document everything, dates, times, witnesses. And know that what you are doing right now is the hardest part, breaking the silence. Our meetings continued weekly, with new faces appearing gradually. A restaurant owner who lost his liquor license after refusing to host a fundraiser for Sheriff Sheila's preferred county commissioner candidate. A teacher whose classroom was repeatedly subjected to drug searches after she questioned increased police presence in schools. Most powerfully, Deputy Carter finally attended, arriving late and parking far from the cabin. I joined law enforcement to help people, he explained, his young face tight with stress. But under Sheriff Dawson, it is all about control and intimidation. Deputies who question orders find themselves working graveyard shifts or patrolling the county line. Do other deputies feel the same? I asked. Most are just scared, he admitted, but a few keep private records of questionable orders, just in case. That could be crucial evidence, I told him, but do not take any unnecessary risks. As our group grew, so did the whispers around town. I noticed subtle changes, cashiers holding my gaze a moment longer, nods of acknowledgement from strangers, quiet words of encouragement. Someone is finally standing up to her, I overheard in the post office line. About time someone pushed back, whispered the barber as he trimmed my hair. My secure line to the state agency buzzed with updates. Investigation proceeding, building case file, continue gathering testimonials. Sheriff Sheila noticed the change as well. Her patrols past my property increased, sometimes hourly. Deputies photographed visitors to my ranch. The harassment grew more overt. Noise complaints at all hours, water quality inspections, livestock health checks. But something had shifted in the atmosphere of Pinewood Valley. For the first time in years, people were speaking up, quietly at first, but with growing courage. At the next town council meeting, when Sheriff Sheila presented her monthly report, a small miracle occurred. Harold Cooper raised his hand during the public comment period. I would like to know why school maintenance budgets have been cut, while Sheriff Department equipment allocations have tripled, he asked, his voice steady but hands trembling. A murmur rippled through the room. Sheriff Sheila stared at Harold with cold fury, but before she could respond, Mrs. Jensen stood up as well. And I would like clarification on how code enforcement priorities are determined, she added, her elderly voice quavering but determined. For a moment, Sheriff Sheila seemed genuinely stunned. 2 challenges in one meeting, something that had not happened in years. Her recovery was swift but telling. I would be happy to address these concerns privately, she replied with a tight smile. My office hours are. With respect, Sheriff, Harold interrupted, these are matters of public record and public interest. We would prefer answers in this public forum. The tension in the room was electric. Sheriff Sheila's hand moved unconsciously to rest on her sidearm, a subtle gesture of intimidation that my hidden camera captured perfectly. Very well, she said, her voice hardening. Equipment allocations are based on public safety needs as determined by my office and approved by the county commission. As for code enforcement, we respond to citizen complaints and observed violations equally. The answers were practiced and empty, but that was not what mattered. What mattered was that people had spoken up, and others had witnessed it. As the meeting dispersed, I caught Sheriff Sheila watching me with naked hatred. She knew something had changed. She suspected I was behind it, but she did not yet understand the full scope of what was coming. That night, I received another secure message from my state contact. Sufficient evidence compiled for preliminary action. Stand by for significant developments. The foundation of Sheriff Sheila's empire had begun to crack, and the tremors were only going to grow stronger. The first hint of what was coming appeared in the regional newspaper, a small article buried on page 3. State announces Rural Oversight Initiative for County Governments. Most readers would have skimmed past it without a second thought, but I recognized it for what it was, the groundwork for what would follow. 3 days later, Mark called directly instead of sending an encrypted message. "It is happening," he said without preamble. "The State Justice Department has approved emergency funding for a new county supervisory position, independent oversight with authority over all county departments, including law enforcement." My pulse quickened, and they need someone with experience in corruption investigations, someone who knows how to recognize systemic abuse of power. The smile was audible in his voice. "Your retirement is officially over, Thomas. They want you in the position." The news should have elated me. Instead, a strange reluctance settled in my chest. "Mark, I came here to leave that life behind." "Did you, or did you come home to fix what was broken?" he challenged. "This is the perfect solution. You will have official authority, state backing, and complete independence from local influence." "Sheriff Sheila will fight it with everything she has," I warned. "Let her try," Mark replied confidently. "The governor himself has signed off on this initiative. Too many rural counties are suffering under similar scenarios. Your case file was just the tipping point they needed." 2 days later, the announcement appeared in the local paper and on regional news stations. Former federal investigator Thomas Mitchell, appointed as county oversight supervisor. The article detailed my 15-year career dismantling corrupt systems across multiple states and my authority to audit and oversee all county departments, including the sheriff's office. The town's reaction was immediate and polarized. My allies from the cabin meetings called or visited with barely contained excitement. Others, those with ties to Sheriff Sheila's system, avoided me entirely. At the diner, conversation stopped when I entered, then resumed in hushed, urgent tones. Sheriff Sheila's response was official silence. No statement, no acknowledgement, just patrol cars parked across from my property around the clock, watching and waiting. The confrontation came at the next town council meeting. The small hall was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along walls and spilling out the door. News cameras from larger cities had arrived, sensing a story worth covering. I arrived early, taking a seat in the front row. Sheriff Sheila entered minutes later, flanked by her most loyal deputies. Her eyes swept the room with practiced authority before landing on me. I met her gaze steadily, neither challenging nor yielding. Mayor Hopkins called the meeting to order, his discomfort evident as he announced the first agenda item: introduction of Thomas Mitchell, newly appointed county oversight supervisor. I walked to the podium amid murmurs and scattered applause. Sheriff Sheila sat stone-faced in her designated chair, badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Thank you, Mayor Hopkins," I began. "Many of you knew me years ago before I left Pinewood Valley. Others have only met me recently as I returned to restore my uncle's ranch. What most of you did not know is that for 15 years, I served with the Federal Oversight Commission, investigating systemic corruption in local governments across the country." I paused, letting the revelation settle over the room. I had planned to retire quietly here, but it became clear that our county faces challenges that require attention. The state has created this position to ensure all departments, from zoning to public works to law enforcement, operate with transparency, accountability, and within the bounds of the law. Sheriff Sheila shifted in her seat, her composure cracking just enough for those watching closely to notice. Beginning next week, my office will conduct comprehensive audits of all county operations. Every department will be reviewed with the same thorough standard. Every complaint will be investigated. Every citizen will have equal access to county services without fear of retaliation or favoritism. I looked directly at Sheriff Sheila now. This is not about targeting any individual or department. This is about restoring public trust in local government. I hope all county officials will cooperate fully with this process. As I returned to my seat, Sheriff Sheila rose suddenly, approaching the podium without being called. Mayor Hopkins started to object but fell silent under her glare. "While we welcome state interest in our county's success," she began, her voice tight with controlled fury, "I must express concern about potential disruption to established procedures that have kept this community safe and orderly." She turned to face me directly. "Mr. Mitchell has been a resident for barely 2 months. He has no recent experience with our community's needs or challenges. Yet he has been granted extraordinary authority over departments that have served faithfully for years." Her gaze swept the room. "I want to assure my officers and all citizens that the Sheriff's Department will continue its duties without interruption. We will cooperate with reasonable requests while maintaining our commitment to public safety above all else." The implied resistance was clear to everyone present. As the meeting continued through other agenda items, the tension remained palpable. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, Sheriff Sheila intercepted me in the darkened hallway outside the chamber. We stood alone, two adversaries finally acknowledging the battle directly. "Quite the performance," she hissed, all pretense of professionalism gone. "You had this planned from the beginning." "No," I replied honestly. "I really did come back to retire. You forced this outcome, Sheriff." "You have no idea who you are dealing with," she warned, stepping closer. "I have built this county. I have protected it. The connections I have would amaze you." "Those connections will not save you," I said quietly. "Not from the evidence I have already collected." Her eyes widened slightly, the first genuine shock I had seen from her. "You are finished," she whispered, "one way or another." I held her gaze steadily. "No, Sheriff, you are the one who is finished, and I am your new boss now." I walked away, leaving her standing in the shadows. The dynamic had shifted irrevocably. For years, Sheriff Sheila had been the most powerful figure in the county, untouchable and unchallenged. Now, suddenly, she answered to someone who knew exactly how her system operated and how to dismantle it piece by piece. The battle lines were drawn, but unlike her previous targets, I had not come armed with just courage and conviction. I had come with authority, evidence, and the full weight of state backing. The queen of the county had just met her match. The morning after the town meeting, I arrived at my newly assigned office in the county administrative building to find the door already open. Inside, filing cabinets stood with drawers pulled out, several clearly emptied recently. The computer on the desk had been wiped clean, restored to factory settings. Sheriff Sheila had worked quickly overnight, removing anything that might incriminate her or her allies. What she did not realize was that I had anticipated this exact reaction. My assistant arrived an hour later, Rebecca, the librarian who had been part of our secret meetings. Her appointment had been deliberately kept off public announcements. "They did exactly what you predicted," she observed, surveying the empty filing cabinets. "Desperation makes people predictable," I replied. "Are the backup servers still intact?" She nodded. "The IT department confirmed the county maintains cloud backups going back 3 years. Sheriff Sheila apparently did not know about them. Her first mistake, I noted. There will be more. We worked methodically, restoring access to digital records and requesting physical copies from state archives. Meanwhile, my team, composed entirely of members from our cabin meetings, began conducting interviews with county employees across all departments. Sheriff Sheila's response escalated rapidly. Deputies were stationed in hallways, monitoring who entered which offices. County employees were reminded of confidentiality agreements. Surveillance cameras in the building mysteriously malfunctioned whenever my team conducted interviews. 3 days into our audit, a clerk from the permit office slipped me a note during a routine meeting. "Sheriff threatened my job if I spoke to you. She is destroying records in the basement storage tonight." I alerted state troopers, who arrived just in time to catch 2 deputies removing boxes of documents from the county archive. The deputies claimed they were reorganizing files at nearly midnight. The incident created the first public crack in Sheriff Sheila's facade. The local newspaper, timid for years under her influence, ran a small but significant headline: "Deputies questioned about late-night document removal." Sheriff Sheila grew increasingly erratic. In a staff meeting witnessed by multiple employees, she pounded the table and shouted, "Anyone cooperating with Mitchell's witch hunt will regret it. I made this county what it is today." One brave admin assistant recorded the outburst on her phone. By afternoon, the audio had reached my office and was added to our growing evidence file. The pressure began showing results. A county clerk provided access to hidden financial records showing selective enforcement of fines. Businesses that supported Sheriff Sheila received warnings, while opponents received maximum penalties. A zoning official revealed how property assessments had been manipulated to punish the sheriff's enemies. Most significantly, Deputy Carter finally took the ultimate risk. He arrived at my home late one evening, placing a thick leather-bound notebook on my kitchen table. "It is all here," he said, his young face showing both relief and fear. "For 3 years I kept a private log of every questionable order, every unjustified search, every targeted enforcement. Names, dates, locations. Some of the other deputies kept records too, but they are still too afraid to come forward." I examined the notebook carefully. It was devastating, a methodical chronicle of abuse of power, selective enforcement, and personal vendettas carried out under color of law. "This is extraordinarily brave," I told him, "and extraordinarily dangerous for you." "I know," he replied. "That is why I submitted my resignation this morning. I loved being a deputy, but not like this, not what she turned it into." "We will protect you," I promised. "Your testimony will be central to what comes next." The following day, I compiled all evidence gathered thus far: financial records, testimony transcripts, audio recordings, Deputy Carter's log, and documentation of procedural violations. The package was substantial and damning. I sent it directly to the State Attorney General's office with a formal request for criminal investigation. Sheriff Sheila must have sensed the walls closing in. She called an emergency press conference on the courthouse steps, attempting to seize control of the narrative. "This county is under attack from within," she declared to assembled reporters. "An outsider with a personal vendetta is destabilizing systems that have kept our community safe for years. My office is being subjected to unprecedented harassment under the guise of oversight." Her performance might have been convincing had it not been for what happened next. As she spoke, state police vehicles pulled up behind the gathered crowd. Officers in state uniforms approached with formal documents in hand. The lead officer waited until Sheriff Sheila finished her statement before stepping forward. "Sheriff Dawson, I am serving you with official notice that the State Attorney General has opened a formal investigation into allegations of misconduct, abuse of authority, and corruption within your department." Cameras swiveled from Sheriff Sheila to the state officers and back. Her face, normally composed and commanding, showed naked shock as the documents were placed in her hands. "This is absurd," she stammered, her authority crumbling visibly. "These accusations are detailed in the documents you are now holding," the officer interrupted professionally. "Your department's weapons and badges will remain in place pending investigation results, but state officers will be embedded with all deputies effective immediately." Within hours, the story had exploded beyond our small community. Regional news stations led with "Rural Sheriff under investigation for systemic corruption." Online articles detailed allegations spanning years of abuse. For the first time, the people of Pinewood Valley saw Sheriff Sheila's actions exposed to the disinfecting light of public scrutiny. The fear that had silenced them for so long began to lift, replaced by something I had not seen since returning home: hope. The county courthouse had never been so full. Every bench was packed, with people standing along walls and crowding the back of the room. Reporters from major networks jostled for position, their presence underscoring that what was happening in our small town had captured national attention. The bailiff's voice echoed through the tense chamber. "All rise. The court of the 5th Judicial District is now in session, the Honorable Judge Eliza Watkins presiding." Judge Watkins had been brought in from a neighboring county, ensuring no local connections would taint the proceedings. She entered briskly, her expression giving away nothing as she surveyed the crowded courtroom. "Be seated," she instructed, settling behind the bench. "Case number 2023 CR 147, State vs. Sheila Dawson. Multiple counts of official misconduct, abuse of authority, evidence tampering, falsification of official records, and intimidation of witnesses." Sheriff Sheila sat at the defense table, her uniform absent for the first time in public memory. Instead, she wore a conservative navy suit that seemed to hang slightly loose on her frame. The past 2 months of investigation and pretrial hearings had visibly worn her down. Beside her sat an expensive attorney from the state capitol, a telling departure from the local legal representation she had relied on for years. The prosecuting attorney, a seasoned state prosecutor specializing in public corruption, began methodically laying out the case. Financial records revealed systematic enrichment through selective enforcement. Audio recordings captured threats against county employees. Witness after witness confirmed the pattern of abuse. I watched from my designated seat, maintaining a neutral expression despite the emotional weight of the moment. This was far from my first corruption trial, but it was unquestionably the most personal. When called to testify, I approached the stand with the practiced calm developed over 15 years of similar proceedings. I took the oath and settled into the witness chair, facing both the judge and the packed gallery. "Please state your name and position for the record," the prosecutor instructed. "Thomas Mitchell, County Oversight Supervisor, formerly Senior Investigator with the Federal Oversight Commission." "Mr. Mitchell, when did you first become concerned about potential misconduct within the sheriff's office?" I recounted the progression of events factually and precisely. The initial harassment, the escalating intimidation, the systematic patterns that had emerged from multiple testimonies. "In your professional opinion, based on 15 years investigating similar cases, would you characterize these as isolated incidents or as evidence of systemic corruption. These were clearly systematic and deliberate abuses of power, I stated firmly. The consistency of methods, the coordination across multiple county departments, and the targeted nature of enforcement all indicate a carefully constructed system of control rather than random misconduct. When Sheriff Sheila's attorney cross-examined me, he attempted to paint me as a vindictive outsider with a personal agenda. Is it not true that you concealed your background as a federal investigator when you returned to Pinewood Valley? He challenged. I was retired, I replied calmly. There was no obligation to disclose my former profession, just as a retired doctor need not introduce himself as doctor in social settings. And yet you secretly began building a case against Sheriff Dawson almost immediately upon your return. I began documenting potential misconduct only after becoming a target of harassment myself, I corrected. My investigation became official only after my appointment as county supervisor. After my testimony came the parade of witnesses, ordinary citizens who had suffered under Sheriff Sheila's reign. Harold Cooper described systematic intimidation of school employees. The Jensens recounted financial penalties for questioning tax assessments. Mrs. Porter, the young mother from the gas station, detailed how a minor vehicle registration issue had been weaponized against her after she attended community meetings. Most powerful was Deputy Carter's testimony. He walked the court through his private log, dates, incidents, direct quotes from Sheriff Sheila instructing deputies to target specific individuals for enforcement. She told us to find something, anything, on Thomas Mitchell, he testified. She said, and I quote, "Nobody is completely clean. Dig until you find dirt or create some if necessary." Throughout the proceedings, I watched Sheriff Sheila's face. The composed mask she had maintained for years slipped progressively as witness after witness revealed the truth. By the time financial records were presented showing how she had acquired properties seized through questionable enforcement actions, her expression had hardened into something between defiance and desperation. Her defense strategy collapsed under the weight of evidence. Her attorney attempted to portray her actions as aggressive enforcement rather than targeted abuse, but the patterns were too clear, the testimonies too consistent. When the jury returned after deliberation, the forewoman's voice was steady. On the count of official misconduct, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of abuse of authority, we find the defendant guilty. The litany continued through all major charges, with guilty verdicts across the board. Sheriff Sheila remained utterly still as the verdicts were read, her face a mask of disbelief. This was a woman who had never imagined being held accountable, who had built a system specifically to prevent exactly this outcome. Judge Watkins's sentencing remarks were measured but uncompromising. "Ms. Dawson, you were entrusted with extraordinary power to protect and serve your community. Instead, you weaponized that authority against the very citizens you swore to protect. You have caused immeasurable harm to public trust in law enforcement and local government." The sentence was appropriately severe: 8 years in state prison, permanent revocation of law enforcement credentials, and restitution to verified victims of her abuses. As Sheriff Sheila was led away in handcuffs, the same restraint she had used so freely on others, our eyes met briefly across the courtroom. In that moment, I saw the final realization dawn in her expression. She had chosen the wrong person to target, and her entire system of power had unraveled as a result. The gavel fell with a sound of finality. Justice had been served, but for our town, the healing was just beginning. 6 months after Sheriff Sheila's conviction, Pinewood Valley had begun to transform. The changes were subtle at first, people lingering to chat on sidewalks instead of hurrying about their business. Store owners keeping doors open later into the evening. Children playing in the town park without nervous parents constantly scanning for patrol cars. The most visible change was in the sheriff's department itself. With state oversight, we had rebuilt it from the ground up. Deputies who had actively participated in abuse were gone, replaced by officers committed to community-oriented policing. Deputy Carter had returned, now serving as interim sheriff while reforms took root. I watched these changes unfold with quiet satisfaction as I continued my work as county supervisor. The position had evolved from emergency intervention to structural reform. Each week brought new progress, transparent budgeting processes, public access to permit applications, community review boards for all major departments. "Never thought I would see the day," old Joe remarked as I picked up supplies at the hardware store. "Deputies came by yesterday just to check if we needed anything. No clipboard, no inspection, just checking in." Similar stories emerged across town. The library hosted public forums without fear of retaliation. The high school principal made decisions based on educational needs rather than avoiding sheriff department scrutiny. Local businesses operated according to actual regulations rather than Sheriff Sheila's arbitrary interpretations. Most tellingly, people began running for local offices again. The upcoming elections featured multiple candidates for positions that had gone uncontested for years. Campaign signs dotted lawns across the county, visible proof that democracy was reviving. On a bright spring morning, I walked through the town square, nodding to familiar faces. Mrs. Jensen waved from her garden club meeting in the gazebo, a gathering that would have required permits under the old regime. The diner owner called out a greeting, pride evident in his newly renovated storefront that had passed inspection without paying bribes. I settled on a bench in the square, watching the community I had grown up in gradually reclaiming its identity. A young deputy walked by on foot patrol, stopping to help an elderly man carry groceries. The sight would have been unimaginable a year earlier, when deputies served as intimidation rather than assistance. Harold Cooper joined me on the bench, his expression thoughtful as he surveyed the square. "You done good, Thomas," he said simply, "real good." "We all did," I corrected him. "It took everyone's courage to change things." Harold nodded slowly. True enough, but someone had to strike the first match. He gazed across the square. "You know what amazes me most? How fast people adapt to freedom once the fear is gone, like the town was just waiting to exhale." He was right. The transformation had been remarkable once the tipping point was reached. Systems of corruption that seemed invincible one day collapsed under their own weight the next, when enough people simply stopped believing in their power. "What happens when you leave?" Harold asked suddenly. "Your appointment was for reorganization, not permanent, right?" The question had been on my mind as well. My official mandate would end in 3 months. "The systems we have built will continue," I assured him. "Independent oversight, transparent processes, community involvement. No one person will hold all the power again." Later that evening, I stood on my ranch porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of amber and gold, the same view that had welcomed me home over a year earlier. The fence line stood straight and strong now. The barn roof had been properly replaced. The fields were beginning to produce again. My satellite phone rang, Mark's number appearing on the display. "How's retirement treating you this time around?" he asked, the smile evident in his voice. "Better," I admitted, "much better." "Got another case if you're interested," he offered. "Small city up north, mayor's office showing all the classic signs. I considered the offer, watching the shadows lengthen across my fields. In the distance, a patrol car drove slowly past, not monitoring, just the routine community patrol we had established under the new protocols. "I think I will pass," I replied finally. "My work here is not quite finished." "Going to stick around Pinewood Valley, then?" Mark sounded surprised. "For now," I said, "there is still healing to be done, systems to strengthen." The truth was more personal than I wanted to admit, even to Mark. This place had reclaimed me as much as I had helped reclaim it. After 15 years of moving from one corruption case to another, living in temporary apartments and hotel rooms, I had finally found something I had not realized I was missing: home. The next morning, I joined the community breakfast at the diner, a monthly tradition recently revived after years of dormancy. People greeted me warmly, sharing updates on their lives and businesses. The conversation flowed naturally to plans for the town's future, ideas for development, community programs, educational initiatives. No one mentioned Sheriff Sheila by name. Her chapter in our town's history was closing, not through forgetting but through healing and moving forward. As I walked back to my office afterward, I passed the county courthouse where justice had finally been served. A new installation stood on the lawn, a simple stone bench with a small plaque reading, "Truth fears no question." I smiled at the quiet symbolism. One woman's abuse had nearly broken this community. But in fighting back, the town had found something stronger than before: resilience, transparency, and a determination to never again surrender to fear. Sometimes justice wears a badge, but sometimes it simply comes home after 15 years away, ready to rebuild what should never have been broken.